just like why we have funerals, when people are able to share and express their grief together and share the memories of that person, that in and of itself is a really important tool that we have found have helped families through the bereavement process. And like I said, it was not really our initial goal, was not to be a tool to help bereaved families. It was a tool to kind of store legacies. And then in turn, we realized this is actually really helpful for people.
Welcome to the Direct Cremation Podcast with your hosts, Tyler Yamasaki and Will DeMichaelis. I met our next guest at my first ever funeral conference back in 2014. She is the founder and president of Keeper Memorials, an online memorial platform dedicated to memorializing the lives of the departed. She is the editor of TalkDeath, a death-positive media company whose mission is to encourage positive and constructive conversations around death and dying. She's also on the board of the International Memorialization Supply Association, the Ernest Becker Foundation, and board member of the Speaking Grief documentary by WPSU. She is an entrepreneur in every sense of the word, and I've had the privilege of watching her grow within the industry and making a huge impact on death care. Please help us welcome Mandy Benoualid.
Thank you, Tyler. That's a very nice introduction.
Hey, Mandy.
And you got my last name right. Thank you so much.
I know. I was practicing.
Most people do. Don't worry.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us. I want to talk about you a little bit. I want to talk about the company and, kind of the journey you've taken to get here, because as you and I both have been in the industry for, coming up on a decade, I think our companies have both changed and morphed and pivoted multiple times. So I'd like to talk about that. But let's go ahead and start from the beginning. What's your background and how did you find yourself in death care?
Yeah, my background, probably like a lot of other folks in this space, except for the funeral directors that are multi-generational that are listening here, kind of came into death care a bit out of the blue, you could say. My story is a bit of an organic one. I was visiting a cemetery. I was with my family visiting my grandparents, and we came across a glass front niche that had a blank CD in it. And if anyone's kind of heard me talk about my story before, it'll be familiar, but it was funny. It was like a blank CD that, the ones that you would burn in the 90s. Yes, I'm old enough to remember that. And it had the words Dad's Work written on it in Sharpie. And that was obviously a weird thing to see in a cemetery. I had never seen that in a cemetery before. And I did what most of us tend to do when we are curious about something or want to find an answer, is I took out my phone and I tried to Google this person's name. And nothing came up, of course. So I was just really curious, like what someone would put on a blank CD and then put in a space with this person's remains as a way to memorialize them. So that one experience just made me realize that everyone has a story in a cemetery. And we have that name, we have that person's name, we have their date of birth and their date of death, and we have that dash in between, and there's nothing else. There's a whole dash, there's a whole life. And we can't really learn about that in the traditional sense of a cemetery. So the goal of Keeper when we got started was really to not so much solve a problem, but solve this curiosity of what if you could learn about the life story of every single person in a cemetery. And that's how it started. My background personally was not really had anything to do with death care. Although I learned over the years that a lot of the work that I did in the past actually makes a lot of sense. So I went to university. I had a communications degree. I was working in documentary filmmaking in the sound production department. And then I was working in marketing as well. And as we know in marketing and communications, it's all about kind of telling stories to be able, for the most part, sell something. And communications and documentary filming was also all about storytelling. So I realized only like maybe a couple of years ago that a lot of the work that I did actually kind of makes sense to where I am today.
Yeah. I mean, I think we met in, it was probably 2014 because we had our first booth ever at an ICCFA conference. And I think at the time, Keeper was spelled Queepr. And it did have a different business model, which kind of goes towards your story. Can you tell us a little bit about what the original Keeper solution was solving, or what it was doing?
Yeah, absolutely. You are right. Keeper was spelt in a pretty awkward way, Queepr. It was our startup-y name. As you probably know, a ton of startups just like didn't put vowels, because who needs vowels when we can assume what they are?
Shorter
So
the
we
better.
obviously got rid of that. Yeah. So it was super cool, very unique. Obviously, we had the domain for that, although there was another company that had something similar, which was funny. But anyways, another story. And we were spelt like that with the Q and the R at the end, because we primarily started out with QR codes on monuments. So we were producing different types of QR code plaques, from, plexi style ones to just aluminum ones, different styles. And they could be added onto a marker, either permanently or semi-permanently. And the whole idea is, as it is with any QR code, is it was a quick link to access that person's online memorial page. So the idea is you'd walk around the cemetery, see the QR code, snap it, and then get to the memorial page from there. So it was essentially just a quick way of getting to a page. And at that time, QR codes were known. They were sort of popular, but marketing firms kind of ruined them in the way that they put them up on billboards and just use them for really silly things. And they kind of killed the QR code. Meanwhile, in China, they're still at that time in 2014 scanning like 1 million QR codes a day. And what's interesting now is that even though we moved out of this, as we know now, since COVID, QR codes are everywhere. You go to a restaurant, scan a QR code. Also, all phones have QR code scanners native to their cameras, which we didn't have, almost 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So funny enough, we're actually getting requests to bring back the QR codes because people literally ask us for them all the time. So it's kind of a funny full circle.
Yeah. I will say, though, I think your name was quite clever. It wasn't spelled funny just to be funny spelled and just to get a domain. Like, it actually had a purpose for the Q and the R. Yeah, I do think you were probably 8 years too early for that in America.
Yes.
Probably.
And I just have to say that with the name, the funniest thing would be at conferences, watching people walk by our booth and being like, Queeper, and like trying to pronounce it. The most often we got was Queeper.
Yeah.
Queeper. It was very funny. It's like people didn't know that like Q's make a cuss sound. We were all just so used to having like a U next to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that breaks the rule, right? You have to have a U after a Q.
I mean,
Not in the startup.
Really?
Not in the startup world. So what did you learn from that, and what has Keeper as a company evolved into?
Oh my goodness, what have we learned? We learned so much. I mean, at the core, I think one of the most important things, or some of the most important things we learned about, was directly from our users. What is important to a family when someone passes away, in terms of what needs do they have when it comes to personalization, legacy building, legacy keeping, genealogy, and understanding how being able to interact with your community and allowing your community to be able to reach out to you in a time like that, and finding a really simple way to be able to do that. We learned that that was really important. We were kind of doing it at first more from like a historical perspective because it was interesting. There's so many important stories. And by understanding how important those individual stories are to the family, no matter how notable that person was, obviously it's so much more than that. We learned that it became like a grief tool. And to this day, we still have individuals that will go on their loved one's page once a week, and they almost use it like a journal as a way of actually speaking to their loved one. And we even had a master's student who was doing research on that and how people engage with online memorial platforms as a way to spiritually and otherwise reach out to their loved ones and as a tool for healing. So that was something really important that I learned on the user side, for sure.
That's really interesting that you have those use cases. Based on like those use cases, Mandy, how is that different or similar to the current obituary system found online?
Definitely. Well, so of course, as we all know, most funeral homes will offer like a standard obituary page when someone passes away. And what's a little different with ours is that the obituaries are really meant for that, as obituaries, as death notices. It's a way to tell the community that this person has passed away and to share important information like where and when a memorial service is taking place. So it has like a really important function, almost as a means of communication, right? Whereas we have found that ours has just more of a longevity, and that's based on the way that we built the platform with more of a social media design and opportunity for engagement. So families are going back to our pages. And like, for example, in the area where you would put the obituary, we call it the biography. We're more about the person's life story and less about that death notice piece. And where we also differ, and why we also kind of pivoted from primarily working with funeral homes to now working a lot more with cemeteries, and particularly combo funeral home cemeteries, is that we connect the online memorial pages to the final resting place. And so our application really started as just basic online memorials, which could be compared to, the obits that you'll see on a funeral home. But the idea is that it expands to providing that information to the family. The idea is that you can actually put the final resting place information on the memorial page, and it actually acts as a way for families to be able to provide directions to someone's resting place much further down the line. So what we've done is we've added a whole kiosk system for funeral homes use it, but it is obviously used more by cemeteries, where it's like a beautifully designed kind of kiosk interface that instead of just having like records, like as a name, which kind of ends up looking like an Excel spreadsheet, it has like photos of all the people. So you can look up your loved one at the cemetery, you see their photo, you see their story, and then you can get walking directions to their monument as well. So that's kind of a way that we've expanded and differentiated in that way. Is yes, we do provide the service for at need, but a really important piece is the longevity of it by connecting it to the cemetery, which at the end of the day is where families are trusting their loved ones to be in perpetuity, right? So these pages are meant to be in perpetuity as well.
What hardware do you use for that kiosk, out of curiosity?
We do not provide the hardware ourselves,
Okay.
but we offer different solutions as suggestions to clients. So
Okay.
something that we see that's really popular is taking like a television screen, and there's a couple companies that actually add touchscreen overlays on these. So having a kiosk, I think it's important to have it being like tactile. Touchscreen is very important. And so you can take like a pretty large television screen and just put this overlay on it. You can't even tell, but it makes the whole screen touchscreen. So it's super cool.
Wow.
But then we have clients that want to use it outside and they have wintertime. So there'll be kind of freestanding kiosks, similar to the ones that you'll see like in a mall or in an airport.
Mhm.
And they either have Wi-Fi, direct internet, they are obviously secured, can be locked properly, and are also weather safe.
Cool.
So how do you find the digital legacy and remembrance of people online? How does that help in the grieving process with families?
It helps in a number of ways. When we first started, we did quite a bit of research. Again, we did it with some anthropology master's students. We did it with some religious study PhDs. We really wanted to understand the landscape of grief and bereavement and memorialization. And so some of the questions we asked was about, how do you remember someone when you're thinking of them? How do you share memories with friends and family at the time of death or at an anniversary? And primarily what people are doing is they're sharing stories and photographs. And so just by providing a simple tool where you can tell a story, but you're not just given like a blank page of text, you're given prompts, you're given ways to organize the information, ways to organize your thoughts. And by doing that, people are able to take the time to write that out. But more importantly, they're able to receive those memories from their loved ones and from like their community. So we actually call it the quilt effect. So, just like with your friends or with a family member, we all have different experiences with people, different moments, different memories. And we all kind of have a piece of that person with us. And so by having a tool where people can easily add that piece of that person together, it kind of makes like this full quilt, right? So we all have our little squares, we all have our little memories, and it kind of creates this whole big picture. And so to answer your question, what we have found is just like why we have funerals, when people are able to share and express their grief together and share the memories of that person, that in and of itself is a really important tool that we have found have helped families through the bereavement process. And like I said, it was not really our initial goal, was not to be a tool to help bereaved families. It was a tool to kind of store legacies. And then in turn, we realized this is actually really helpful for people.
Well, as someone who's seen thousands and hundreds, I don't even know what your number is. I'm sure it's a lot, but what elements should be included when creating the complete story of a person's legacy?
That's a good question. I find that media tends to be the best way to tell a story, not to sound really cheesy, but a photo does, speak 1,000 words or whatever that saying is. I would definitely say a nice timeline of someone's life, if possible, is a really great way to just understand who that person was, particularly from a historical perspective, where they were born, like which country, and where they moved, and where they worked. And, we all have our different kind of lives, so to speak. We have our academic, we have our professional lives, we have our family lives. But at the end of the day, photos, videos, and audio, people like to upload voicemails a lot. It's really kind of special and touching. People like to do that. And we find that the pieces of media are really what are able to say a lot. And it kind of gives you that instant feeling. I can't really express the word itself, but when you're able to see a photo and you're able to see these, especially photos you've never seen before of your loved one in these different moments or maybe with these different emotions attached to it, it's generally what we have found to be really meaningful for people.
Yeah. You have this connectedness with a person based on your experiences with them. And it's really impactful to see them before you ever met them or at other times where you weren't around, get to kind of fill in that tapestry of their life about a person that you care about. And I think that goes a long way with people.
Exactly.
Yeah. In all your years working with memorial pages, is there anything surprising that you found families doing or behaviors you didn't expect from families to do when interacting with memorial pages?
Well, the one I mentioned earlier where they're basically addressing the decedent, that they're addressing their loved one and speaking directly to them, that's something that I wasn't really expecting and that we see a lot. Another one, maybe less surprising, but another one that we have to handle a lot is the family tree piece. Mm-hmm. And we do have a whole family tree. That's kind of another differentiator from us with other applications, is that we have a whole genealogy section built into it that's pretty robust. And something that surprised me was how important who exactly is listed where on a family tree. And so we've had to build exactly, you wouldn't think so. We had to build all these customizations so that you can drag and drop whoever you want where, I want my siblings ordered from oldest to youngest. I want this. Wow. It was like a lot. So that was surprising, how much people cared about where things are. And it almost got to the point where with some users, we had to be we appreciate you trying to work with our application, but you might just want to build a website based on your needs, because they had so many specific wants. We have a new system coming out in the first quarter of next year. We totally redesigned Keeper completely. We took, basically 10 years of feedback and put it into this application. And part of it is that we're building a whole new piece called storylines. And so just like how we talked about what are the most important pieces of media? What we've done is we've created photo stories, video stories, album stories, map stories. So you can take these templates of, let's say, one photo and tell a whole story behind that photo. Maybe it's a wedding photo. Then you could take a whole album. Maybe it's like an album of like when they lived, in another country or when they were kids. You could tell a whole story with that album. We have a map story where you can put pins on a map all over the world. And it can be, if they were an avid traveler, you could put like where they traveled to, and like that's part of their life. Or if they immigrated from one country to another, you can show like their immigration journey, like on the map from pin to pin.
That's cool. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, so we did all that, and it's like, and then you can move things around wherever you want. So we did all that to kind of meet those needs that we found people had, where, to be honest, I think we're kind of spoiled with technology today. There's so much that we can do. So users really do have very high expectations of what they can do and what they should be able to do. Like, what do you mean I can't change the title of this, like, of this section? And it's like, well, it's hard coded, but so yeah, it's been interesting.
Mandy, I saw on your website that Keeper also does consultations. What does a normal Keeper consultation look like with a family?
Yeah, so I think maybe the consultations that you saw were for our virtual memorial services.
Yeah.
So since COVID, we added a whole new service to our application, which is virtual memorial services or virtual funerals. We have a team of people, and they will work with the family to basically craft the perfect memorial service for them. And that will be either totally virtual, hybrid, meaning there are people in person and virtual that are communicating, or just live streamed, which many folks listening to this will be aware of, where you have people online watching what's happening in person and they're not engaging. Okay. So when we have a consultation, we try to understand what the family is looking for. And then we basically craft a personalized service from there. So a lot of our clients, obviously we were really busy during COVID because funeral homes, not only did they not have the capacity, they didn't have the capacity, and they also weren't able to do in-person gatherings. So obviously during COVID, it was really popular. But another thing that surprised us is that we are just as busy now as we were before.
Wow.
There's a few things. One is that as I think we've seen as a trend in the space, is that families are kind of opting for more celebration of life style events. They're looking for more unique events that meet their loved one's personality. Obviously many people are still opting for a memorial service at a funeral home. And alternatively, I also know a lot of funeral directors that are using other spaces like hotels and art galleries and other kinds of chapels to host memorial services. So we kind of do a mix, but there's still a lot of families that are wanting to be virtual or are wanting to be hybrid, where the expectation to travel for a funeral now is not really there anymore. And the expectation to be able to watch something or to engage in an in-person event is completely there. So it's definitely shifted the way we're having our online memorials. That's for sure.
When you're helping arrange a virtual celebration, how do you work alongside the funeral home, or do you not even work alongside the funeral home?
Yeah, we do both, actually. So Keeper has always, when Keeper actually started, we were a direct-to-consumer site. So before we even started partnering with funeral homes and cemeteries, we were just working as an app on the internet where people would find us. That's still a huge part of our business. We work a lot directly with consumers. But part of our partnerships with funeral homes and cemeteries is that, and we specifically did this a lot during COVID, is that funeral homes didn't have the capacity, the technology, or the staff to be able to do these virtual funerals. So we would partner with them where they would essentially send us a service saying, we just did a cremation, or we're doing an interment for this family. Of course, potentially during COVID, they weren't able to have a gathering. So they would then introduce the family to us, and then we would take care of it from there. And then the funeral home would get like a nice 20% cut of it. So it was actually like a really nice revenue driver for them because they didn't have to do any of the work, and we had like specialists put everything together. But then the memorial pages would still be branded to the funeral home and stuff like that. So that's still something that we offer to some of our clients when, believe it or not, a lot of families are still going totally virtual or they're doing hybrid as well.
Well, when we think about a virtual funeral, I think initially, the most simple thought would be we just put a camera in the funeral home and record the service and broadcast that out, which I'm sure, can be done. But as you see new trends and you've talked about how people want to do celebrations and have things at art galleries or hotels, what story does that tell about the future customer trends of what they're going to want?
I mean, it's just something that we're even seeing today on our virtual and hybrid services, right? A big reason why consumers are coming straight to us to work with us is that we really craft it to meet that person. So again, this is something that I think so many funeral directors have heard at so many conferences, and they're probably so annoyed and don't want to hear it anymore. But personalization is really important to families. I'll just, say that. So I think that we can all say that we've been to funerals before, and there has been a religious figure, potentially the uncle, people that are giving these eulogies and sharing some words, and it falls flat because it does not feel like it actually represents your loved one. I still remember being at my aunt's funeral, and the spiritual figure that was leading it like read a whole passage that literally was the complete opposite of her. And it was like more painful than anything. Like it was worse to hear that and to be part of that. And I know so many families that have gone through that.
Yeah.
And, the interesting thing is like, it's a challenge because funeral directors are so overworked already. And it's hard to put together something like super custom for a family. Like it takes a lot of work. And that's why we have a team that does it. Like we work with death doulas and celebrants. And this is where I think, and I've always been someone that believes in this, that there's a lot of opportunities for funeral directors to be working with death doulas, celebrants, so that funeral directors can focus on like all the super important things that they do, and then partner with these other people whose goal it is to build the beautiful, proper send-off, walk the family through the dying process, etc. And so what this tells me is that families are going to continue to want something different, something more personal, but also just something that feels like it could be, like even just like that funeral home, I forget where it is, that has that like speakeasy in their basement, right? People want like a different vibe now.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them don't. It's not every family. I absolutely cannot say it's every family. We have, the amount of traditional Polish and Italian and like Ukrainian funerals that I've done just from my time working at a funeral home. They're like so classic, they're perfect, they're so meaningful for the family. It's what they do as a community. But as we know, we are becoming more and more secular, and the people that are becoming more further removed from their either religious or cultural traditions don't have something to hold on to. So someone dies and we're like, well, what now? Okay, well, having clergy like is not meaningful for me. Going to a church is not meaningful for me. Doing all these things because we don't connect in the same way with these traditions as we used to, we kind of just don't really know what to do. And so this is where we're kind of ushering in this new age of rituals. And that's the thing. It's not that rituals are dead. It's that they're transforming and they're changing to meet what is meaningful to us today. And that's what we've learned, is that people still need something. I think that memorial services are so incredibly important to the bereavement process. And we are just in a transition phase where we're learning about what is actually going to be meaningful to people who don't have that tradition around them that is still kind of rich in their family.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's been a very common theme we've heard from a lot of our guests previously.
Yeah. Maybe you can tell me if I'm on base or off, Mandy, but I kind of think that there's a gap between what people are looking for in terms of celebrating their loved one's life and what they're being offered at the funeral home. Mm-hmm. And to your point on secularization, I kind of view it as really they're looking for someone to put in the effort to understand your loved one's specific individuality and personality. And that's what they want celebrated, not generic passages about grief and loss or prayers or anything like that. It's that specification to that person.
And that's exactly what goes back to when you asked me what happens in the consultation. That's right. Literally what we're doing. And so, if the person just loved Bach, okay, wonderful. Does anyone in the family play piano or violin? Great. Let's get them on video. Let's have them do a quick performance. Something that we do that's amazing, that's so simple. It sounds intense, but it's not, is we do these things called legacy activities. So let's say the person was a gardener, or the person made these famous cookies, or they just loved martinis. We literally craft these small 30-minute events, workshops, whatever you want to call them, in memory of that person. So we will have, when we send out the invites, we will say, okay, everyone, please make sure that you have a pot and go to the store and buy flowers. Or we'll actually send out little seeds to the family by mail, and we all go on camera or in person, and everyone gets a pot and a bit of soil, and you plant the seed in memory of that person. Or we will send out a recipe. Everyone gets all of the materials together before the service. And then there's literally one where we had the decedent themselves who talked you through how to make these cookies. And we all made these cookies together.
That's amazing. That's really cool.
Yeah. Another one, super simple, just to finish with that, is we had a bartender that we had come in virtually on Zoom, and he taught us, this person loved martinis. So he taught us the history of martinis. And then we all, as you know, making a martini takes 2 seconds. But we all made a martini together, shook it up, and then we all did a cheers and had a quick little cocktail hour in memory of this person. So it's effort, it takes time. And that's why I'm saying that funeral directors are already so overworked. If a funeral home has the resources to have someone on their team to do this type of stuff, amazing. If not, there's amazing people in the space that are looking to do this kind of work with families. And I think that there could be really powerful collaborations that we build throughout the community.
Oh, these are definitely good takeaways that can be incorporated. Some of it you can do virtually, but I think even in person, it would be even more impactful to the people that are there. Yeah, so that's great. But I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about TalkDeath, where you are the co-founder and editor. So what is TalkDeath and what does it do?
The story behind TalkDeath is that we were doing a blog for Keeper, and it was a blog like many others start. It was particularly for marketing purposes. We wanted people on Google to look up certain questions, and we would come up, and then we would drive users. Very kind of classic marketing strategy when it comes to blogging. And what ended up happening, funny enough, is some people started to know us because of our blog content and not because we were an online memorial platform. So we were like, oh, I love your articles. And we're like, oh, great. Do you know about our product? And they'd be like, no, what's that? So kind of funny, interesting turn of events. So what happened was, I personally got really passionate about death care and talking about so many things around it, like the trends around it, and talking about, bereavement issues, political issues. There's so much to talk about when it comes to death. And so obviously that kind of passion came through, and people started to really follow us on the work that we're doing. And what happened was we decided to migrate it, or rebrand it rather, to TalkDeath. So TalkDeath today is, we call it kind of a death conscious hub. So it's a website. We publish articles weekly or every second week, depending on how busy we are. And we talk about all things death and dying. So we have resources about where can I have green burial in Canada to what's an advance directive. And then we have, essays on bereavement. We have trends in funerals. We do a whole actual careers in death care series. So we published one article about the different careers you could have in the death care space because people are super fascinated by the death care space. We all know that millennials and Gen Zers are like getting really fascinated by the work that we all do. And so we had one article about that, and it was getting so many hits that we turned it into a series. So we have an interview series that is written and then goes to video, and we're actually coming out with a podcast eventually for it. And we interview and talk to people in the space. So funeral directors, embalmers, crematory operators, but then we go all the way to coroners and pathologists and hospice nurses and talk to people about the full spectrum of death care and, after death care. And we really try to focus on like, what is your actual job? Like, what do you actually do? What is your day to day? What do you have to do? What are the bad things about it? What are the good things? So our audience is really vast. And we post a lot on social media. So social media is probably our biggest following, mostly on Instagram, but we're very active on Facebook and Twitter. Hopefully we'll still do Twitter for another while and TikTok, of course. But we're not up there with some of the other TikTokers, but we're like a bit older than the TikTokers. So we're trying to get ourselves into it. And it's really just become a community where people can learn about all things around death and dying, discuss it. We do events. We're doing actually an event in Denver in December of this year. Just get together. We kind of have prompts around death and dying. We kind of do it for networking, community building. And yeah, that was a little bit of a long answer, but there's a lot of stuff we do. And it's been kind of like the side project, but it's been really interesting.
I think that aspect of what you do is really important, just as kind of almost like a journal with what to include what's available in the industry that people may not have heard of or like know as a resource. And I think a lot of that generally can be categorized in what I would consider the death positivity movement. Mm-hmm. And death is not something that will ever be maybe fully embraced by a lot of people or wanted to be embraced. So is it pointless to push death positivity? What do you think the value is for funeral homes to take away with the death positivity movement?
That's a great question. I don't really even know what pushing death positivity would necessarily mean, but like creating a safe, open space for people to learn and talk about death overall, whether it's their own death or the loss of a loved one, I think is really important. Just quick example, I've attended many death cafes that are actually hosted at funeral homes, right? Mm. So just so that we're clear on that, death positivity, the goal of it is to open up the conversations around death and dying through many different aspects of it. And the goal of it is to make it less scary, make it more normalized to talk about. And this is something that funeral directors have been trying to push and have been trying to talk about for so long when it comes to pre-planning. Mm-hmm. And I think it's potentially just maybe thinking about it from a different approach, right? Imagine having a death cafe with, of course, a facilitator, or a movie night where you watch Harold and Maude, or having a cemetery tour. And really just creating a safe space where people can talk and be curious about death, because people are so curious about it. I don't know about you guys, but as soon as I'm at a family dinner, my family's over now, it's been 10 years, but when I meet a new person, or I'm at, my husband and I go out for drinks with maybe someone new, and they find out that we work in death care, it is just like question after question after question. And every time we hang out with people, it ends up being a conversation around death. And it's not because I'm bringing it up. I don't bring it up unless they start probing me. And people just don't have an opportunity or a space to talk about it, whether that's just a curiosity of what happens when you die, to what are the options when I die, or talking about an experience you had following a death. we just don't have an open space in society to talk about it. It's one of those things listed as not dinner table conversation. And it's something that we think is. And it's just pretty obvious from the past 10 years of my experience that people are so fascinated by it and they want to talk about it more.
I say that the people who are fascinated by it definitely let you know, but I don't think that the majority of people are fascinated by it. That's what I got. I had similar experiences to you, but I also had some experiences where I would say what I did and get zero response.
And get total recoil, of course.
Yeah, real recoil, redirect, pivot, conversation, so on and so forth. But I think what you point to with how you handle both of those conversations help the death positivity movement, because you're always calm, cool, and collected in the space where you feel comfortable, and you're happy to engage anyone who wants to engage with you. And usually that pushes the needle in the positive direction when it comes to opening these conversations. And that's the best we can do and all we can expect from us. I think,
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that the recoiling, though, it's as if you would talk about your sex life to like your grandma. Like, it's like, it's one of those things that we don't talk about. Right. And so that's part of what death positivity is trying to do, is it's trying to open up the conversation and normalize it. And I don't know if you actually know the story behind it. I mean, you probably know that it was Caitlin Doty, but the tweet that set off this term was, we're all here talking about sex positivity all the time, because sex positivity was like, a big conversation 10 years ago. And it's like, well, what about death positivity? It was literally this one tweet that she compared it to the sex positive movement that coined that term.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's the story behind it. And so it's really similar to that, where sex positivity is about normalizing sex, all the different areas of it that, we just talk about it now, feels a little awkward. It's the same thing around death. And so the goal is that we can talk about it, fears and all, in a little bit more of an open way.
What do you find to be the top few things that you think a funeral director can be very upfront and open about in educating the general public? Like, what do you see the general public really wants to know about around death?
I think it's their options. That would be my number one. As we all know, there are other options that are becoming available to people in certain states, including aquamation, resumation, all the different names for it. Those were just brands, but alkaline hydrolysis, essentially. Obviously, green burial. I think that there's a transparency that's missing. And something that we found is that people are very open to other options. They're very curious about them. And what we find is that people are not really given those options, and they're not really told about the options that they have. So that would be one piece. And I think that this kind of transparency, this openness that funeral directors can give by talking people through their different options, and maybe not just the options they offer, would be important. I know a lot of funeral homes, most funeral homes don't have, most funeral homes don't even have a crematory, but just like how, that they can go work with, someone that has alkaline hydrolysis or offering the green options. That's just one example. I think that that's definitely something that we all know is definitely changing in the space. So being very open and honest about the options that are out there, I think is really important, because at the end of the day, that's one of the biggest problems, is that when people learn about a lot of these options, they love them and they're just not told about them. And that's because the funeral directors are the ones that are in front of the families at these times. And again, they're super busy and they don't really have the time to be, lecturing on what is green burial. But providing resources to families can be as simple as, sending a YouTube video about this is what this is, right? So I think that there's more options in that way. And I think that transparency and the options are important, because that once again goes back to personalization. People want options, they want to pick and choose, and they want to find something that makes sense for them and their loved one.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. It's actually really reflective of the funeral director's kind of maybe rote arrangement process that they can maybe fall into. Mm-hmm. I think I just really agree with that, the general profession being overworked right now, and it just is not to the benefit of the consumer.
Not at all. Not at all. And there's a fatigue that comes with it that most other professions just don't have, you know?
Yeah. It's true. And it's really hard to describe unless you've been in it. I think hospice workers get it as well. And hospital nurses and SNF nurses and social workers understand it as well. But that type of emotional intensity day in and day out, tough. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think as a general rule, I like to see transparency in everything. But I know we've talked about how, families just don't want to talk about it. People don't want to talk about death and dying. It does present itself as an uphill battle to funeral directors because no one ever really wants to necessarily talk to a funeral director. Like once I have to talk to a funeral director, it's usually in a situation where I wish I was not part of. So in your mind, let's say that we do have a completely death positive environment where people are talking about it. What do you think that can look like for families and the funeral profession itself?
I can see it being something similar to birth. Just like how you have a birth plan when you're pregnant, people building themselves a death plan. Where do I want to die? How do I want to die? What happens if I can't make decisions for myself at the end of life? What do I want my service to look like? What do I want my final disposition to be? For people to take ownership of their own death and of their dying. And I know that there's, of course, the argument that I'm dead, it doesn't matter. But I think we know very well, or anyone that works in funeral service, you have a group of children after mom has died sitting in the funeral director's office debating about mom wanted to be cremated, she wanted to be buried, she wanted this, no, this is the casket she needs. It makes it so challenging. And, I I had dinner with someone this past weekend, and his dad died very suddenly of a heart attack. And the hospital was just pressuring him the second he died of, which funeral home are you working with? Who's coming to pick him up?
Yeah.
And he had no time to even think about what his dad would have wanted, let alone find a funeral home that would fit him properly. And I know that some of us just don't care what happens to us, but it's not about us. Just like the memorial service is not about the person that died, it's about the people you left behind. And so to me, a death positive society would be people that are able to talk about death openly. And that's the thing, is come to terms with it. It's not even like possible. Like I talk about death every day, and there is no way I've come to terms with my own death. No way. Like I'm sure even funeral directors that, or embalmers that, work with 20 bodies a day, which is a lot, not 20 bodies a day, but you know what I mean? We still don't come to terms with it. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, sure, it's grounding, but it's still a very difficult thing to grasp because literally no one that has gone through it has come back to tell us what it's like. We have no idea, right? And just being able to talk about the complicatedness of it all and the emotions of it all, and just getting our affairs in order in that way, I think that to me, that is a death positive society. And to be honest, I think if we were death positive, I think that we would be less of a capitalistic society. There's like a whole kind of side movement of like minimalism as death positivity, because just like collecting objects is kind of a form of death denial, because you're like, I'm collecting all these objects, but like they're only going to last as long as I do. And then when I die, someone's going to have to take care of these. And so I think it would really shift our societal perspective if we all thought about and talked about death a little more. Maybe that's thinking too big, but you asked me a hypothetical question.
Oh, thank you.
Mandy, what do you think death care looks like in 10 years?
I think it looks greener. I think the green options are going to become more popular and more people are going to know about them. More places are going to be offering them. So I think overall, it's going to be a little greener for sure. I'm hoping it'll be a little more collaborative. I'm hoping that a lot of these people who are passionate about helping people through the dying process, and people that are passionate about assisting people at the end of life and with their funeral plans, will be able to find a collaborative place in death care alongside funeral directors. I don't think funeral directors are ever going to go away. They're so important. The work that them and their transport staff and their embalmers is so incredibly important. But I think that there is room for other people to come in and assist families and give them a more like hand-holding type of service that, like we said many times already, funeral directors just don't have the capacity to do. So greener, more collaborative. And I think with that, the personalization will just come right through.
Right. I think that's a worthy environment to strive for. I think we deal with a lot more people at peace in an environment like that. So I hope so too, with a lot of that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, how can funeral directors, funeral owners work with you and learn more about your memorial pages or, being a partner with you on virtual funerals?
Yeah, absolutely. So Keeper offers like an enterprise solution. So essentially what we do is we go totally white label for our funeral home and cemetery partners. So it basically, our online memorial system lives on your website and on a totally branded version of Keeper, essentially. And it includes the kiosk system and everything like that. So what we like to do is we tend to connect to your management system where you keep all of your records, and all of that gets imported directly into Keeper. There's a whole ability. The reason why we're called Keeper is that the people that manage it are the keepers of the page. So family members get full access to it. And it becomes kind of a hands-off approach for funeral homes while giving kind of the reins to families so that funeral homes, once again, don't have to do extra work they don't have time to do. Mm-hmm. And so if you are interested in learning more about that or in our virtual funerals that we partner on, you can go to mykeeper.com. You can reach out to me at mandy@mykeeper.com. And if you just feel like seeing fun, interesting death content on your social media feed, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, which is at TalkDeathDaily. Or just check out talkdeath.com. And we've got hundreds of articles now.
Nice. And we'll put all the links in the description, but MyKeeper is spelled how you would say it, right?
Exactly. Keeper, which funny enough, when I'm on the phone, people still need me to respell it 10 times, but
it's a lot of E's, a lot of L's.
A lot of E's, yes. Keeper.
Cool. Well, Mandy, it's been a pleasure. I think there's been a lot we can learn about memorialization and hopefully moving more towards an open relationship with death. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you want to say?
No, that's all. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks a lot, Mandy.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you ever want to know more, please find us at directcremation.com.